homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today I am making a quince jam. If you're not familiar with quince, they are related to apples. They grow in a bush form rather than a tree. And the fruit is very, very hard and pretty impossible to eat when it's raw, but it is delicious when it's cooked. And this is something that's more common in Europe than it is in the United States. A lot of people have no idea what quince is in this country. I happen to grow up in Northern California, and we happen to have a quince tree that was kind of tucked back along the river riparian area bank growing up. And so I knew of it and I'd seen it. I never knew what you were supposed to do with it. And my parents didn't really do much with it either. And then I can't remember, I think it was just one of those like homesteading plants that I was like, well, this seems like something that's pretty easy to grow. It might be good to have around. I'm always interested in unique varieties. And so we put in a quince tree. There also is an ornamental quince variety that's very common. It blooms in the spring, about the same time that forsythia blooms. That does not have any fruit on it. So just know that there's ornamental quince and then there's actually edible quince. There's a bunch of different cultivars that are selected for fragrance and selected for size of fruit and for taste of fruit. And so you can do your own research in terms of if you want to put some quince in terms of what sounds good. But it's a really unique fruit. It is incredibly aromatic. And so it's fun to just pick it and leave it in a bowl on your counter just over the course of the mid to late fall, because it just smells so good and it kind of will like permeate aromatherapy your house. But it's also relatively easy to cook up and make preserves out of it. In France, I'll put the name up on the screen because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but in France they make a preserve out of it that's very, very thick, and they serve it on charcuterie boards. So it's kind of an accompaniment to cured meats and cheeses and that kind of thing. So very popular in France. And I have been playing around and making quince jam for probably 6 or 7 years now. We had a couple of quince trees. Turns out it's wildly susceptible to fire blight. They haven't really been bred to be resistant to it in any great extent. And so we have one tree that does pretty well and is kind of out of the way, but doesn't get a ton of fruit on it because it gets a little bit too much shade. And then we had another one that just rocketed out of the ground and was doing super well and then got completely taken out by fire blight and we had to remove the tree. So know if you've got fire blight issues in your area, quince may not be the right plant for you. I thought I'd show you guys how to turn it into a jam just because it took me a little bit to figure it out, and there isn't a ton of information out there on the ins and outs of this. You have to cook it down for a very long time in some sugar syrup. And the really fun thing about this is it changes color over time. And so it starts out looking blonde and kind of appley, and then over the course of the cooking time, which can be as long as 45 minutes or an hour, it turns this beautiful shade of pink. And so it's just really great fun to see the alchemy of how that changes. And I don't exactly know why. I'll see if I can do some research and maybe put something up on the screen about what's happening. But it's a very cool transformation to witness. And in the end, what you end up with is this lovely, it looks like basically kind of a pink applesauce. It's just gorgeous. And you can just do simple quince and sugar. I like to add just a little bit of vanilla to the mix, just for the fragrance and the color. And then a pinch of salt, just because anything super sweet, it helps to balance it out with a little bit of salt. And it's reminiscent of apple, but it has its own very unique flavor. It's a little bit grainy, kind of the way a pear can sometimes be a little bit grainy, but very unique flavor and just a really fun homestead plant to have. And if you can avoid the fire blight, they're relatively low maintenance. So quince jam, let's get started. So I usually pick my quince either right before or right after a light frost. So for my area, that would be late October. And they will hold, these have been holding on the counter for well over a month and a half. So they've got a pretty long, stable shelf life. They're a little bit fuzzy and a little bit sticky. And so you're going to want to give them a good rinse and then just peel them like you would an apple. You can see just based on how hard this is to chop that they're very dense. And the core in them tends to extend out a little farther than it would on a regular apple. And so you are probably going to have to trim out that little bit of core that's in the center there. There are recipes for quince jelly instead of jam, in which case you actually include the core because it has a ton of pectin in it, and then you drain the juice out later. I like to include the whole fruit, and so I take that part out. I have here almost 36 ounces of chopped quince, and that is what I'm basing this recipe on. And to this, I'm going to add 2 quarts of water, so 64 ounces of water. And that's mostly because it's going to take a long time for these to cook down. And then 21 ounces or 3 cups of granulated sugar. And I'm going to bring that to a boil. And then I was just doing other things in the kitchen while this slowly cooked down, and I would stir it every 5 or 10 minutes. And so here's kind of the sequence as it boils down, softens up, starts to change color. Really starting to get a pretty color here. And then I could have used a stick blender for this, but I decided instead to just give it a mash with a potato masher, or you could just leave it chunky. Some people definitely like a quince jam or a quince preserve with big pieces of quince in it. And so that's also an option. I left a little bit of texture in here, but mostly mushed it down so that it was more like an applesauce. And then at this point, I'm cooking it down some more. And as it starts to get thick, it really starts to bubble out of the pot. And so it starts to make a mess. Theoretically, the gelling point for jam is 220 degrees for my elevation. I never managed to quite get there. And so there's always this long sequence of me testing the temperature, stirring, it's volcanoing and blopping all over the place. I actually have a burn on my foot because I was in stocking feet and some of this plopped out onto my foot. And eventually I just give up because I can't wait any longer, and it turns out fine. So somewhere between 218 and 220 if you're under 1,000 feet in elevation. Adding the vanilla late in the game, because otherwise with that 45-minute cook time, that vanilla is just going to flash off. And then there is a pinch of salt in here as well. And then I'm putting this in small 4-ounce containers just because it is often served with a charcuterie tray. This is a nice small amount for people that want to do that. These hold about 4.5 ounces by weight. And then here you can see there's the last of it. And I could see just with the stuff drying in the pot that it was definitely gelled. And so I wasn't too worried that I hadn't cooked it enough. Wipe your rims, of course, just like with any canning recipe. And you're looking for about 1/4 inch of headspace here. And then new lids and rings. The rings don't have to be new, but the lids should be. And then everything gets wiped, gets lidded, and then you stick it into the container. Here's what our little bit of leftover jam that wasn't enough to fill a container looks like. It's cooled off just from sitting, and you can see how thick this is and how long it's taking to even start to fall off of the spoon. And so I knew that I had reached a very nice consistency with this. It's perfect. Here's the example of it splattering all over the kitchen. So it is kind of messy. Everything goes into your canner, hot water, hot jam into the canner, bring that back to a full rolling boil, and then you're going to process those for 15 minutes. And then I like to let things sit for 5 minutes after it's done processing just to make sure I've got a really nice seal, and then out it comes. This recipe comes from the Ball Blue Book. I have a slightly older edition, and I've modified it to be by weight instead of by volume because they give you the starting weight of the fruit, but not the starting weight of once everything's peeled and processed, which I hate. And so this is what's worked for me. And the recipe, as always, is in the description. But quince jam, very nice Christmas gift. Give this recipe a try, Tribe. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.